if you could just grab your food quietly and then find a seat and sit down. We're going to start tonight's debate. My name is Joe Leeson Schatz, and I am the Director of Speech and Debate here at Binghamton University. We have paired up with You Defendant in order to bring a series of public debates to campus, so that way we can inform you about issues that affect you on a day-to-day basis, as well as the political issues that affect you in the larger community. The goal of these public debates is so that way everyone can hear both sides of the individual debate and not be dragged down into mudslinging, but rather get a full picture of what both sides have to present and understand. Tonight's topic is on gun laws in New York and nationally, and it will feature Tom King, who is the president of New York State's NRA, and is which is New York State's oldest and largest gun rights organization, and Leah Barrett, who is the former executive director of New Yorkers Against Gun Violence, New York State's largest grassroots gun control organization. During the course of the debate, we'll have up on the screen here, you're able to text in questions that will be asked during the public debate based upon the quality of your questions. To do that, all you have to do is text 574048 and your message to 22333. So you text 22333 and then that number followed by your message, and then your question will end up going to our moderator, Rob Kilmer, who will then select whether or not the question will be answered. And so without further ado, I bring you tonight's debate. Thank you.
Everybody hear me? Yep. Okay. Good evening. Welcome to this You Defendant debate. It is being co-sponsored by the Speech and Debate team at Binghamton University and Defendant Inc. My name is Rob Kilmer. I'm the founder of Defendant Inc. and will be moderating tonight's You Defendant debate. Binghamton experienced a mass shooting at the Civic Center on April 3rd, 2009. Maybe that outcome is different if the shooter didn't have a semi-automatic weapon. 2 weeks ago, a mistrial was declared in the trial of a man who broke into a house in Whitney Point at 2 a.m. and beat the owner with a wrench nearly to death. Maybe that outcome is different if the homeowner had a gun of any kind. You Defendant operates under the assumption that every argument that can be defended is a good one. You Defendant is not pro or anti anything. According to a Gallup poll released 2 weeks ago, 77% of the nation is divided on the most important, 77% of Americans believe the nation is divided on our most important values. That is the highest percentage ever recorded. The American public is more divided than it has ever been. Americans need to be able to agree on facts even though they disagree on solutions. That is step one in getting back to a place where we as a nation are able to actually talk through and think through solutions to important issues about which we disagree. You Defendant was founded to confront that problem and become the one place people can rely on to get the facts behind the arguments. You Defendant debates are different than other debates both in purpose and in format. The purpose of a You Defendant debate is to take important and divisive issues like tonight's issue and break these issues down to their factual realities. Emotional arguments have no place here. By requiring debaters to fully defend their arguments rather than attacking their opponent's position, people who attend this debate or watch it via live stream will have actual facts and actually talk about those facts when the debate ends. It is the mission of a You Defendant debate to give the audience, here and elsewhere, a clear picture of how their lives will be affected if either debater's position becomes reality. The format is simple. There are only 2 rules. Each debater must directly answer the question that is asked, and each must do so without any reference to the opposing debater or the opposing debater's positions. In other words, each debater must put forth her or his own positions and defend them. Other than some general questions for each debater as it pertains to the Second Amendment, The framework for the prepared questions will be as follows. What laws do you think should be enacted? What laws do you think should be repealed? I met with the debaters separately and asked them to identify those laws that they think should be enacted and those laws they think should be repealed. Not surprisingly, they each had strong opinions on what those laws should be. Because the debaters' positions are different, they may not be asked the same questions. Instead, the questions and the follow-up questions will be designed to provide the public with the facts that support the arguments. If a debater cites a specific fact in support of an argument, the opposing debater can ask me to verify that fact. I will then ask the debater who stated that fact to tell us where that information came from. That debater will then tell us the source, or tell us that they can't specifically identify the source, and we'll move on. The debaters will have 3 minutes to respond to the initial question, and then I will ask as many follow-up questions as I think are necessary to provide relevant information to the public. Tonight's issue is firearms legislation in New York and nationally. Out of respect for and in deference to the seriousness of this issue, and out of respect for the people on all sides who have such an enormous stake in the outcome of this issue, we ask the audience to remain completely quiet throughout. As difficult as that might be, we owe it to ourselves for one night to conduct a debate that is accountable but civil. For my part, I promise to moderate a debate worthy of the issue itself and worthy of the people whose lives are affected by this issue. Having said all that, let's get on with it. Both debaters tonight care deeply about and have dedicated a substantial amount of their professional lives to firearms issues. I want to clarify that Tom King is the president of the New York State Rifle and Pistol Association. It was a reference to the NRA when we started. Tonight's first question, which was determined by coin toss, is for Leah Barrett. And that question is, set the timer here. The Second Amendment states, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. In the context of the Second Amendment, do you believe that the words to keep and bear arms implies that there is a right to actually carry them?
Thank you. Good evening. With respect to the wording in the Second Amendment, I think it was almost it was ambiguously written by the founders because they weren't exactly sure. It has two clauses. A well-regulated militia. You'll notice the second and third words are well-regulated, being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And for many years, that was interpreted as a collective right, really until 2008. When the Supreme Court decided the Heller case, and they decided that the Second Amendment actually meant an individual right to have a firearm for self-defense in one's home, period. That's all it said. So, no, I don't believe it means, nor does Justice Scalia, who wrote the opinion in Heller, that people have the right to carry any kind of gun anytime, anywhere, any place. Clearly, all of our rights are circumscribed. Our freedom of speech is curtailed by libel and slander laws, and the Heller ruling and the Second Amendment likewise is also circumscribed. It clearly states that government, which actually was convened, government that is, to collectively protect us from what we can't protect ourselves from as individuals, has the right to and legitimate interest in controlling gun ownership in the United States. And the majority opinion, which I said Scalia wrote, states that nothing should cast doubt on long-standing prohibitions on the possession of firearms by felons and the mentally ill, or laws forbidding the carrying of firearms in sensitive places such as schools and government buildings, or laws imposing conditions and qualifications on the commercial sale of arms. So even Justice Scalia understood the government's primary reason for existing is to safeguard public safety through providing for the common defense, protecting the environment, and regulating behaviors and products such as firearms that are dangerous. So when it comes to protecting Americans from gun violence, however, our current government, that is Congress, has failed miserably. Gun laws actually work. Year after year, we see a very powerful correlation States with stronger gun laws have fewer gun deaths per capita, while states with weak gun laws have more gun deaths. New York State has the fourth lowest gun death rate in the nation and is the fourth most populated state. The state with the highest gun death rate is Alaska, followed by Louisiana, where gun laws are very weak and gun ownership is very high. So it's a silly argument, in my view, to oppose sensible gun laws by saying criminals don't obey laws. By that logic, why have any laws at all prohibiting people from doing anything, including murder?
Well, let me just...
Since they'll find a way to do it anyway.
Keep you on... So you don't believe, then, that the keep and bear arms clause, or words within that clause, implies any right whatsoever outside of the home to carry weapons?
That's correct.
Okay. Next question is for Tom King. It's also the Second Amendment, from the text of the Second Amendment. Again, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. In the context of the Second Amendment, how do you interpret the word arms? How do you define it?
Arms can be either a firearm, it can be a bow and arrow, it can be a machine gun, it can be a knife, it can be any type of weapon that you would be using to defend yourself against any activity or crime. I think that if you look back at the Founding Fathers when the Second Amendment was written, they had just finished a very dangerous, a very bloody war. And they were living in a time that there were no police, there wasn't a active military, and they had to defend themselves. And when it came necessary to defend yourselves, they would use whatever it was at hand. It could have been an axe, okay? Obviously, the first choice would have been a musket or a firearm, but that's what the Second Amendment was to protect. It was to protect the right of self-defense and the right to up against a government that was usurping your rights. Remember what the Revolutionary War was about.
Let me ask you this. I mean, as far as arms, as you interpret it, I mean, does that include a grenade launcher? Does that include a tank? Does it, in your mind, is there any limit to what that word means in that amendment? Does it end anywhere?
Oh, of course. I don't think that there's anybody that's sitting here or anywhere else that should be advocating the use of any type of weapons of mass destruction. I don't think that anybody should own a bazooka. I think that the fully automatic firearms that are legal in most states but highly regulated, it's possible that you can own them. But no, as far as tanks, bazookas, flamethrowers, no, I don't agree with that.
Okay. I mean, would it be fair to say that gun safety groups and gun rights groups agree that there is a line to be drawn somewhere, but disagree on where?
Oh yeah, that's of course that's true.
Okay. Next question is for Leah Barrett. Since 1996, the Centers for Disease Control has been forbidden from researching gun violence. Specifically, the CDC has been prevented from spending funds to, quote, advocate or promote gun control, end quote. When you and I spoke about this, it was my impression that you believe that that is a law that should be repealed. Do you agree?
Yes, I do. What we're talking about in particular is an amendment that was a rider to an appropriations bill in 1996 by a then Congressman James Dickey of Arkansas, which did, as you say, basically stopped federal dollars going to gun violence research. There were there were some interesting studies that were coming out in the early 90s from public health researchers showing that having a gun in the home, for example, did not provide protection. In fact, it was more dangerous than not having a gun. You were more likely to use it on yourself or suicide, unintentional shooting or homicide than you were to repel a domestic intruder. And I believe that it was this that alarmed the corporate gun lobby more than anything, because they realized that if studies like this continued to be done, the evidence would build for laws that are evidence-based to protect Americans from unnecessary gun violence that occurs in the home and elsewhere. And I'm certain that was the motivation for the corporate gun lobby to effectively get their lackey, Congressman Dickey, to put this appropriations rider on the bill, which effectively cut off funding by the CDC for gun violence prevention. So Congress also made the message clear by cutting the CDC's budget by $2.6 million, which was exactly the same amount the agency had spent the previous year on gun violence research. The funds were reinstated, but they were earmarked for other things, not for gun violence research. So the CDC did effectively back off. It's been over 20 years of no research. And also in 2011, Congress hit the National Institutes of Health with similar restrictions on researching gun violence. President Obama, a year later, tried to ease the chokehold. He ordered the CDC to research the causes and preventions of gun violence and called on Congress to provide $10 million in funding. That funding never materialized because Congress never appropriated the money. And CDC remains on the sidelines in gun violence research. It spends about $100,000 a year on gun violence research. To put that in perspective, if you look at something like tobacco research and smoking, the CDC spends $5 million a year. They spend billions on other public health issues here in the United States. But curiously, nothing on the public health crisis, which is gun violence, which kills 33,000 Americans and wounds 84,000 every year. That's 117,000 Americans shot every single year, and a rate that outpaces our developed nation peers by orders of magnitude. So the reason for this gun violence in the United States is clear to most people. Too many guns and too easily accessible to too many people who should not have them, to dangerous individuals. And so gun violence research is important, and the corporate gun lobby understood this, that if you don't have good research, you can't devise good evidence-based policy, and that indeed was the intent of the ban and why we have not been able to get it reinstated, despite over 150 medical groups signing on asking Congress to please reinstate funding for gun violence research, which is a raging public health crisis in the United States today as we speak. So researchers can sometimes convince, this is also a problem, we don't have information on crime guns in the crime gun market because Congress has made it very difficult for the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms to actually enforce the laws on the books. For example, crime gun trace data, which shows where guns that are recovered at crime scenes actually originate from. That data that the ATF gets can only be shared with law enforcement, and law enforcement can't share it with researchers or any other members of the public. So, and researchers can only look at the total numbers as we can. So, for example, knowing in New York that 67% of all guns recovered in the state of New York originate from outside the state. That figure is 90% for New York City. We know that Virginia...
I gotta stop you there.
Okay.
We'll come back to that.
Okay.
I want to give equal time as best I can. Question for Tom King. New York SAFE Act. Which part or parts do you think should be repealed?
Well, in an ideal world, it never would have passed the way it did. You know, in the dark of the night, without time for our legislators to read it. But all that said, there's some issues there that need to be repealed because they do nothing to keep guns out of the hands of criminals. They do nothing to lessen crime. All they do is place a burden on the lawful legal gun owner of New York State. For instance, the ammunition database. A little known fact is that if this database goes into effect and every gun owner who is buying ammunition has to have a background search done, there's going to be a fee added on to his purchase. Now, no one has announced the fee. We've all heard different rumors. You know, the anti-gun forces are saying, oh, it's only going to be $1 or $2, but people within the political process are saying, well, it could be up to $5 for the purchase. That's an onerous tax, and it's meant to discourage the lawful citizen from buying ammunition. The recertification of pistol permits is also a onerous act that's been imposed upon the pistol permit holders of New York State. Pistol permit holders are vetted more than anyone else in the state. We have to go through untold numbers of background checks, okay? And when we do this, they find out that whether or not you've had any mental institution in the background, whether you've had any crimes in the background, whether there's any type of order of protection against you, and what this is doing. The letter that's going to come out with this is going to say you have to go online and recertify this, and if you don't by such and such a date, your pistol permit is going to be revoked. Now, the Department of Criminal Justice Services, DCJS, has been recertifying people's permits for the past 15 years. They won't admit it because they don't want people to know that this is already going on. And you're going to ask me, how do I know? Well, I know because the former Director of Operations for DCJS happens to be a very good friend of mine and a gun owner. And he was the one who was forced to implement it under another governor. The other part that I think should be modified or done away with is the pistol grip that is the infamous straight hand grip that makes these guns so lethal. All it is a hand grip that allows you to hold a gun and put your finger in the trigger. Now, why do I think that should be done away with? There's all sorts of ways of modifying the firearm to get away from it. There are approximately 390,000 disabled shooters who need the pistol grip in order to control the firearm while they're shooting. These mostly are veterans and some athletes, but it's a tool. It's not a lethal perturbance. It doesn't do anything. It's a handle, and that should be done away with. There's other issues that regarding the SAFE Act that I think should be done away with. But the fact of the matter is that it's not going to be, because of the way the political system is set up in New York State. Under an ideal world, what would have happened rather than anti-gun groups getting together in planning this without asking any input from anybody on the other side, and then springing it on both the Assembly and the Senate in the middle of the night, would have been to sit down with us and say, we have a problem here. What can we do? But that didn't happen.
Let me ask you one question about the SAFE Act. And you mentioned mental health, and there is for those of you who don't know, the SAFE Act is it's a comprehensive set of laws that was passed that affects several different areas of law under New York's laws. And one of them is the mental hygiene law. And you had mentioned about mental health. Do you support the mental hygiene law amendment that requires mental health professionals to report to county officials the name of someone they are treating if they conclude, using their professional judgment, that the individual is likely to engage in conduct that would result in serious harm to themselves or others?
Yes, I do. The mental health aspect is, I think, very important. If you want to go back through time, most of the school shootings, Columbine, Newtown, the people being treated with with Prozac-style drugs, okay? And there's even a legal defense that says that these drugs can make you violent, and it has been used in a couple of instances to get someone to have the charges dropped and to have additional screenings going on. In the meantime, the person didn't go to jail and never will. Now, what I think should happen is that I think there should be a uniform code that the doctors have to follow in order to keep this fair and to keep people who actually don't belong on the list off the list. And there also should be a vehicle to make the people, to allow the people that are on the list an opportunity to give off if they feel they shouldn't be on it. Now, for instance, we, the New York State Rifle and Pistol Association, represented a veteran from the Watertown area who he was back from Iraq for probably, I don't know, about 3 months, and he was having a problem sleeping. So he went in and talked to his doctor, and his doctor prescribed some sleeping pills for him, which he never took because he doesn't believe in taking any type of drugs. And he went home that night. But his doctor reported him to the list, saying that it was an involuntary visit, and the sheriff showed up at his house to take his firearms. This guy wasn't any more dangerous than you or I, but he couldn't sleep. And I've never been to Iraq, I've never been to Afghanistan, but I've talked to a lot of people over there, and there are a lot of horrors that probably could keep you up awake at night. And all he was looking for was a little help on that. He had never been diagnosed with any other problem, and yet they took his firearms away. And it would have cost him $10,000 in fees to get his guns back. Fortunately, the New York State Rifle and Pistol Association defended him, and he was successful. His firearms were successfully returned to him.
So you don't, summarizing that, you do not, you would not support repeal of that aspect of the SAFE Act pertaining to mental hygiene?
No, what I would do is I would support modification of it to fit what I was saying, that there has to be a legal format that evaluates each individual, and if that places him on this list, he has to have the right to appeal it or get off of it if need be. That's what I said. That's what I would suggest.
Two things. The next question is from the audience. It'll be for Leah Barrett. I had told both debaters that they would be able to give opening statements, and then I just started without doing that. So there's going to be closing. I'll give each an opportunity to make a closing statement. This question is from the audience for Leah Barrett. It says, Ms. Barrett claimed earlier that states with the strictest gun laws have less crime. What is her position about the inner city of Chicago at this point in time?
Okay, actually what I said was not less crime, I said gun death rates. So states with strong gun laws tend to have lower gun death rates than states with weak gun laws. And that's true if you look at all the CDC information, the Centers for Disease Control data. Chicago can easily be explained by the fact that guns end up on the streets of South Chicago because they're trafficked in from states with weak laws like Indiana, Nebraska, other parts of the Midwest. There's well-known trafficking routes that law enforcement knows about where these guns are coming from. It's very, very easy to go cross over from the south side of Chicago into Indiana, or indeed a private seller, and buy guns for not very much, and then bring them into the streets of Chicago, unload them for a lot of money. It's a lucrative business, gun trafficking. The same patterns exist for New York as well. The number one state supplying illegal guns to New York State is Virginia, followed by Florida, Georgia, the Carolinas. So that pattern is well known in New York as well. It's called the Iron Pipeline, where guns are trafficked by people wanting to make a profit, traffickers, illegal traffickers, who obtain their guns from dishonest gun dealers. There are a small number of them who will sell guns off the books. They obtain them from gun shows where background checks are not required. They often use what's called a straw purchaser, which is an individual who can pass a federal background check, and then hands that gun or guns off to the trafficker to go and do what they will with them. So there are various ways that traffickers get their hands on guns, but the easiest is to go to a southern state or a Midwestern state where gun laws are very loose and you don't have universal background checks like the state of New York does, which means you have to conduct a criminal background check for every gun sold, whether it's a private sale, a sale at a gun show, at a flea market, or over the internet. We already have to, now federally, gun dealers have to conduct, federally licensed gun dealers have to conduct background checks for gun sales. But that leaves at least 40%, probably 50%, we don't know because we haven't been able to research it, portion of the market that buyers do not undergo background checks. Since the last study was done on the number of people buying guns outside of licensed dealers, we've had the advent of the internet and sites like armslist.com that sell guns. A lot of private sellers are on there, and we know that people get their guns from avenues like that. There was a very famous shooting in Wisconsin in October of 2012. A man was prohibited federally from having a gun because of domestic violence. He had a restraining order against him by his estranged wife. So he couldn't buy a gun from a dealer, but he went to armslist.com, got one from a private seller, turned up at his wife's salon, she was a manicurist, shot her dead and 2 other people, and then killed himself. And this pattern unfolds pretty regularly. It's very easy. If you want to get a gun and do something nasty with it, it's really easy. Even Al-Qaeda made a video showing that if you want to come gun shopping in America, would-be terrorists, this is the place to do it because they don't require any kind of identification. You can get whatever you want, as many guns as you want, so what are you waiting for?
Tom, you wanted to challenge at least one assertion there. What is it you
Okay, the 50% of guns, that she said are illegal, and who gave her that information of gun shows being totally open without having any background checks?
I said we don't know, Tom, if you listen to me carefully. The last study that was done is 40% of gun sales were outside of the licensed dealer network. That was done 20 years ago. And what I was saying is since then, we've had many more avenues available for people to buy guns that do not require a background check. The internet, you used to have to go through the newspaper, classified ads, or meet someone at a parking lot or flea markets, but the internet has opened it up very, very widely. So I wouldn't be surprised if a study were done, if the CDC could actually be funded to do a study showing what proportion of guns are actually sold, not from a licensed dealer, but through other avenues that don't require a background check. That would be a study that I would very much like to see done.
Okay. Next question is for Tom King. Do you support universal background checks, including for online and gun show sales?
Yes, I do. And fact be known is that the NRA was the organization that initially pushed background searches for all people buying firearms. And what's been said, that there is federal law that states that all firearms dealers, including those at gun shows, have to do background checks on everybody that buys a firearm. Any internet sale, it has to go from the seller on the internet to a FFL. An FFL is a federal firearms licensed dealer. And every FFL is required to do a background search. So there are very few guns that get to the public that way. Are there guns that do not have a background search done on them? Yes. We are in favor of very strong laws regarding background searches. We don't want bad guys to have guns either, but we are not going to say, or we are not going to allow this to be mischaracterized as a rampant crime, because it's not.
Okay. Next question is for Leah Barrett. You support universal licensing and registration?
Yes, for all guns, yes, I do.
And what is that and why?
Licensing laws basically help facilitate responsible gun ownership, just like driver's licenses help facilitate responsible drivers. And what it would do is require a person to obtain a license before purchasing a firearm. In New York State, you have to have a license to purchase a handgun, but not a long gun. So licensing laws obviously vary from state to state, but the most effective and comprehensive laws require all gun owners to have a license and to renew it on a regular basis. They can only be issued or renewed after the applicant has undergone a background check and safety training, which is very important, and has passed written and performance tests showing that the applicant knows how to safely load, fire, and store a firearm, and has knowledge of the relevant firearm laws. So licensing laws are one good method of closing the so-called private sale loophole, because you do have to have a background check from licensed dealers, but the point is that a lot of gun sales occur outside that licensed dealer network, at gun shows in some states that do not require background checks, flea markets, on the internet, private sellers on the internet. So this is called the private sale loophole. So licensing laws also that require periodic renewal can also help our law enforcement officers to confirm that a gun owner remains eligible to possess a firearm. The Binghamton shooter here a few years ago at the Civic Center had a lifetime permit for his guns. If he had had to renew that, perhaps the local law enforcement would have seen that he had sought mental illness counseling and would have then thought twice about renewing his permit. That's why that's important. So licensing also helps prevent the trafficking of guns, which we talked about, and it makes it much more difficult for criminals, for young people, and other people who are prohibited from having a gun to obtain them. An interesting study was done by Johns Hopkins. In 2007, Missouri repealed its requirement that handgun purchasers have a license or a permit after a background check. So since that repeal in 2007, what happened, they found, is the share of crime guns recovered in Missouri that were originally purchased in-state grew by 25%. And a key indicator of crime gun trafficking, which is the share of guns recovered at crime scenes within 2 years of the original sale, doubled. They found the crime gun murder rate in the state, after controlling for other factors, rose 25%, and it experienced 16% more homicide or gun suicides. If you look at a comparable state, Connecticut, they did the opposite. In 1995, Connecticut enacted a permit to purchase law, licensing. Over the next 10 years, what this researchers found is that gun homicides fell 40% in the state of Connecticut, and gun suicides fell 15%. These are the kinds of studies we need the CDC and the NIH at the federal level to be doing to determine the effectiveness of these laws. But you can see from these two examples that these gun laws appear to be working and to be saving lives.
Okay, next question's for Tom. When you and I spoke, you told me that you favored a national concealed carry law. What is that, and why do you support that?
Well, a national concealed carry law is essentially a license from the federal government that would allow you once you go through the background checks and all of the investigation, to possess a pistol in any state in the United States. Now, you know, there's a lot of people who are going to be aghast at this, but contrary to all of the rhetoric that you hear, that the states that increase lawful gun ownership, the crime rates drop. That's been proven time after time after time. And will there be small areas where there may be an anomaly and the rates rise? Yeah, there could be. I mean, you got Chicago, for an instance. You got actually New York City with the toughest gun control laws in the United States. You got Washington, D.C., where there are people with illegal guns. And if you listen to any of the interviews that are done with convicts and with criminals, they will tell you that no law will keep them from getting a gun. So, what we think is that if the lawful, legal, vetted citizens of the United States are able to possess a firearm wherever they may go, things will become safer. You know, there used to be a statement that everybody made that, you know, you give people firearms, let everybody carry a firearm, and there's going to be blood in the streets. It's going to be like the Wild West. It's just not so. Vermont has absolutely no gun laws. They have what they call constitutional carry. Has the lowest death rate in the nation with firearms. Maine just did the same thing. They abandoned all of their pistol laws and made constitutional carry. Why did they do this? Because they did the research. They know what's happening. They know it's not the lawful gun owner that creates the problem. What we have is we don't have a gun problem. We have a crime problem. We have a violence problem. And I would dare to say that if you took out all of the drug deaths and the drug crime that's involved in these gun statistics, you would find that we have a very, very low rate.
I'd like to challenge on a couple of points, please. Mr. King said that in places where there are more guns, there's less crime. What's the source for that information?
The source for that is a book called More Guns, Less Crime, and this is the person who wrote it, and let me tell you his credentials. John Lott studied economics at UCLA, receiving his BA, an MA, then a PhD. In 1984, Lott has held the positions in law and economics at several institutions, including Yale Law School, Stanford, UCLA, the Wharton School of Business, Texas A&M, Rice University. As a fellow at the University of Chicago, he was a resident scholar at the American Enterprise Institute, which he left to go to work for SUNY Binghamton. He was here doing research. He has since left, but that's where my data comes from.
Can I comment on that?
If you can dispute
okay.
the fact.
Yes, John Lott's book, More Guns, Less Crime, has been thoroughly discredited by many academics and peer-reviewed organizations and institutions. And also in 2004, the National Research Council voted 15-1 that the current evidence could not support John Lott's claim that right-to-carry laws, concealed carry, reduce crime. A sophisticated study was done by Stanford in 2014 showing that, on the contrary, right-to-carry laws have no beneficial impact and actually increase aggravated assaults. Furthermore, John Lott has been caught in a number of ethical violations. He claimed he published a study in the peer-reviewed Economic Journal Watch, even though the journal had actually rejected his paper. He falsely claimed the mass shooting rate in Europe is equivalent to that of the United States. To both the Washington Post fact checker and the Tennessee legislature, his own research actually showed that the US had doubled Europe's rate. He fabricated an entire study on defensive gun use. Anyway, the ethical violations are legion.
No, I just want to know if you have a fact that undermines the facts set forth by...
I think I just gave a few. And the other thing I wanted to challenge was Mr. King's state of Vermont had the lowest gun death rate in the country. That's, I wonder where you got that.
Got that from the CDC.
That's incorrect. Hawaii does.
Leave it at that. I have no way to determine that. Next
Well,
question
I
is...
can show you.
Okay. Next question is for Leah Barrett. In 2005, Congress passed the Protection of Lawful Commerce and Arms Act, a federal statute which provides broad immunity to gun manufacturers and dealers in federal and state court. It's my understanding, based on our conversation, that you believe that law should be repealed. On what basis?
That's right. This is referred to as PLACA for short, or the Gun Industry Immunity Bill. It was long a top priority of the corporate gun lobby, and it was signed into law by George W. Bush in 2005, and basically provides the gun industry special protection from civil justice law that no other industry has. So why was this enacted? Well, the corporate gun lobby lobbied Congress very hard, and they got this special legal protection for negligently selling and designing guns when a firearm was involved in a crime. So the reason this law was deemed necessary by the corporate gun lobby was to protect profits, as the law allows gun companies to profit off supplying guns to criminals and to other illegal markets without, for example, life-saving safety devices or other measures. So what it does, it gives gun companies legal protection in many cases when they negligently sell or make a gun that ends up being used in a crime. And if you think about it, negligence is the most fundamental principle of civil justice in our legal system. It requires everyone in society to simply use reasonable care to not expose other people to harm. So for example, bars can be liable for accidents when they sell negligently alcohol to people who they have reason to think will drive, or cigarettes to underage kids. Gun companies now have this unique immunity from this basic duty in most cases. And one effect of this very terrible law is to give bad apple gun dealers, unethical gun dealers, that use irresponsible practices, or even have had their licenses revoked, receive enhanced legal protection. Why is that right? They actually protect those who engage in the unlawful commerce in firearms. Another effect of the law is that gun manufacturers who negligently sell guns through unethical gun dealers can profit from the criminal gun market without being held accountable to the victims that they hurt. So it gives immunity to gun manufacturers who refuse to install life-saving safety devices, exempting them from basic product liability law. Now, for example, look at car manufacturers. If they know that a car is going to be crashed, they're liable if they fail to make cars crash-worthy, as they should be. And gun companies now have unique protection from this basic duty. And I maintain that PLACA is actually unconstitutional because it deprives gun violence victims of their right to civil justice under the Fifth Amendment, making them, in effect, second-class citizens, unlike anyone else in America. It's also unconstitutional under the 10th Amendment because it allows the federal government to meddle in state affairs by infringing on the long-standing rights of state courts to determine the duties and obligations that are owed between the people and businesses in that community. So I think overall it's a terrible, terrible law that's doing horrible harm to Americans.
And there's a request that you sort of back up your theory about what is motivating the gun industry.
Well, I think that my theory, I think, is pretty sound. Otherwise, why would the National Rifle Association oppose extending background checks to all gun sales? Or any gun laws that would enhance safety for that matter. Because if they did that, what would happen is their gun profits, their gun sales would decline because they would not be able to sell to the illegal market. It's the reason why the gun industry has imposed smart guns, for example. Because smart guns, but they can't be trafficked and they can't be stolen.
Well, I'm just asking you your basic factual support.
Right, and I can't think of any other reason why the corporate gun lobby would oppose every single gun safety regulation that has ever been proposed. Well, I showed you data where they do, so.
Let me just keep moving here. Tom, this is for you.
I know, I challenge the premise that she just made. And why? How can you say that the gun industry is protected from every suit when they're not? What they are protected against is vicarious liability from people who use the guns improperly. If there is a gun that's defective, you can sue the gun manufacturer, and there have been many, many cases of that. The gun manufacturers are only protected from vicarious liability from somebody committing a crime with their firearm.
Okay, well that handles my next question for you, which was how you feel about that. Statute.
Sorry.
That's fine. It worked out fine. Let me ask you this. Smart guns are guns that can only be fired by their owner or by an authorized person. You do not support legislation requiring that any handgun that is sold be capable of being fired only by the authorized user. Did I take that correctly from our meeting?
Yes, you did.
Why is that?
Why is that? Because while smart guns may work 90% of the time, what happens that other 10% of the time when you have a bad guy breaking into your house and you go to get your firearm to protect your wife and your kids, and you grab it and you pull the trigger and nothing happens? Now, the question is going to be asked, how is that possible? Does anybody have an iPhone with a touchpad on it? And does it work every time when you use your fingerprint to get into it? I don't think so. Mine doesn't. And there are all sorts of police departments. There are all sorts of sheriff departments, the military, who all say that smart guns don't work. And if they don't work for the cops, they don't work for me. And would my opinion be changed if there was something that was 100% certain? Well, maybe it would. I don't know. I'm not going to speculate on something that may be coming in the future. But right now, smart guns don't work. I'm beta testing for someone who is an RPI master's degree engineer who is developing a biometric safe for storing a firearm at night or in your car. And it reads your thumbprint. And right now, it works about 80% of the time. You get grease on your finger, it doesn't read properly. Your finger gets wet, it doesn't read properly. Believe this or not, if you get a cut on your thumb and you have a scab on your thumb, it will not read it. So, there's no one that can tell me that these guns are 100% foolproof and that they should be foisted, that's right, foisted upon the gun owners of New York State or the United States.
Okay. This next question is for Leah. You support national safe storage, correct?
Can I respond to the smart gun? I just feel there are a couple of things that.
That's actually the subject of a question in a minute for you. But,
Okay.
you support national safe storage?
Yes, that's right.
What is that and why do you support it?
Firearm safe storage is merely making sure that your gun is locked up so that when it's not in your immediate possession or control, someone who shouldn't have it, like a child or a thief or your depressed teenager, gets their hands on it. And it's not onerous. Safe storage laws do exist at one state, Massachusetts has one, and numerous cities, LA, San Francisco, New York City, Albany, Syracuse, Rochester, Buffalo, Westchester County, a number of places across the country, but it doesn't exist nationally. And the reason it's important is, think about it. You know, we require people to fence in their swimming pools, lock up their household poisons and medicines, strap our kids into car seats, but there's no requirement for gun owners to lock up their guns when they're not in use, and that 1 in 3 homes with children in the United States have guns, many of which are loaded and unsecured, which explains why 9 children a week are unintentionally shot in their homes, and that's from the CDC. Most children actually know where guns are stored. They're smart, they're not dumb. 80% of unintentional firearm deaths of kids under the age of 15 actually occur in the home. So requiring gun owners to lock up their guns is not in their immediate possession or control. Reduces not only accidental shootings, but also suicides and gun thefts. And what's interesting about gun theft, there's no good data, again, we have a data hole, on the number of guns stolen in America. But a recent study from Harvard and Northeastern universities has come up with a figure that guns are stolen once every minute in the United States, which is 1,600 guns a day. And so if you think about it, that's enough guns to provide a weapon for every instance of gun violence in the country each year, many, many times over. And guns that are left in cars and trucks, vehicles, are very easy targets for thieves. So most stolen firearms are never recovered, by the way. And owners often can't provide even the most basic information about their gun, the serial number, so it can be identified and traced.
Let me ask
And in
you
New
this
York
question.
State,
It's
just
a
a minute, we
common
have interesting
question.
data from New York
Hold on
State.
1 second.
Okay.
It's a common question that comes up with this particular argument. How do you respond to the argument that if I'm at home and my gun is stored, then I will not have time to access it if I really need it?
Well, I would just quote Tom King's own words back to him at a press conference in Poughkeepsie in April of 2015. He said that actually they advocate safe storage for their members. And he said there are lots of safes available, biometric safes, combination safes, that can give you access to your gun in a matter of seconds. So, and that's what courts have found as well. When safe storage laws in Massachusetts and San Francisco have been challenged, state and federal courts have upheld safe storage on Second Amendment grounds under the Heller interpretation, saying it does not place an undue burden on the gun owner because safety trumps access to a gun in an emergency.
Obviously, one of the rules of you defended is you can't refer to somebody else's argument. What I've never had is what is you're saying is that his argument agrees with yours. So
He does,
let
yeah.
me just ask, is that accurate?
That's taken out of context. What I said was that we advocate safe storage of firearms and that there are numerous ways to do it. But what I also said is that I oppose the nanny state trying to force upon us laws that make it impossible for us to get to our firearms. That's what I said.
So you believe it may or may not be a good idea, but you don't believe it should be law?
I don't believe it should be law. Neither did the Supreme Court in Heller. That was a misquote. The decision in Heller was stated that there cannot be any restrictions on firearms in the home that would prevent a person from getting to his firearm to protect his life or his family's life.
Let me ask you, ban on gun-related federal research. When you and I talked earlier, you made the point that you object to it because it's one-sided.
Mm-hmm.
What do you mean by that?
Well, you know, what I meant by this being one-sided is that here's a group of people who are funded by very, very wealthy people, the Bloombergs, the Soroses, and they're asking for the federal government to provide millions of dollars to perform this research. I would like to have the federal government produce provide millions and millions of dollars for us to look at how many times firearms were used to prevent crimes, how many times firearms saved lives. You know, but that's not going to happen. So this is the United States. There should be a level playing field. If they get money, we should get money. That's my position.
Well, then let me follow up on that. Would you support funding if it included both research into data concerning gun violence as well as research into data concerning gun ownership for home protection?
Yes, I would.
Okay.
So
Next question. There we have it. First time in
let's just
history
get
of
the
the United
research
States of
done.
America, we have complete agreement between gun safety and gun rights groups on an important issue. You support a ban on assault weapons. How do you define an assault weapon?
Well, the assault weapon is actually defined in federal law. We had a ban on military-style assault weapons, which was incomplete. It wasn't really very effective from 1994 to 2004 because it left out a lot of guns that technically were assault weapons. One thing you should say at the outset about assault weapons is that they were designed for the battlefield. They were not designed for hunting deer. They were designed to kill as many people as possible, as quickly as possible. And it's interesting that since the ban expired in 2004, people say that assault weapons are not being used in crime. Well, the figures refute that. They are used in just 2 to 8% of violent crimes, but high-capacity ammunition magazines are used in up to a quarter of firearm crimes in this country. And guns with high-capacity ammunition magazines, like over 10 rounds, Adam Lanza had guns that had 40 rounds, some guns had even 100, account for a high percentage of police killings and mass shootings, make no mistake. So even though the 2004 law, which expired, had lots of loopholes, it grandfathered in existing assault rifles and magazines, for example. It allowed imports of assault weapons made before the ban. Had a very narrow definition of what an assault weapon that allowed the gun industry to continue producing these was. The ban actually did work to a limited extent. There was a study funded by the National Institute of Justice that following the ban in 1994, the share of crime guns involving assault weapons fell 17%. Johns Hopkins did another study that concluded easier access to guns with high-capacity ammunition magazines means higher casualties and mass shootings because you can get off more rounds more quickly. Just think of the 6-year-olds in Newtown who were riddled with bullets, between 3 and 11 bullets per 6-year-old child. Now, why are assault weapons so deadly? Well, the features actually make them deadly, and the features actually are there for a reason. The military designed them. The pistol grip gives you control. The barrel shout keeps the barrel from overheating. Every single feature has a purpose. But what's really deadly about them is the muzzle velocity. Bullets out of an assault weapon travel at nearly 3 times the speed of sound. So they deliver a punch well beyond the hole that's made by the bullet. They pulverize blood vessels and they turn soft tissue to jelly. Combat surgeons who treated wounds inflicted by this type of high-velocity rifle, like say the AR-15 class of rifles, say that these guns actually scare them. Here's a quote from a trauma surgeon. "The wounds are just otherworldly. You're talking giant, big cavities and a hole you can put your fist through." A chief of trauma surgery at Cooper University Healthcare in Camden and a former Army trauma surgeon said that these injuries are much harder to fix than those from a handgun. It actually puts kinetic energy into tissue it didn't hit. Right. So it destroys blood vessels, and it can go next to the liver and still destroy the liver. So these, if you look at...
I gotta stop you there. I gotta give equal time here. Tom, when you and I spoke, you said you supported a national reciprocity law. What is that?
Well, a national reciprocity law, if it's not possible to get national concealed carry, to have a federal license that's good throughout the United States, we favor a reciprocity law which says that if you are legally vetted and pass all of the background checks in your state to have a concealed carry permit, like your driver's license, it should be good anywhere you go in the United States, as long as that place has concealed carry permits in their own state. It's not a unique idea. It's been around for a number of years, and in the last Congress, I think at last count, there are 42 states that have reciprocity with other states. New York is not one of them. New York does not accept anybody else's pistol permit. However, 17 states except New York's. So essentially what you have is that if you go through all of the vetting to get a pistol permit in your home state, and you go to Florida, you go to North Carolina, your pistol permit will be good in North Carolina or Florida. That's what we support. And we believe that it will make people on the road safer.
Okay. Leah, this question's for you. Do you support smart guns?
Yes, I think I already answered that. RFID technology rather than biometric is another form of smart
I
guns.
cut you off on that.
Okay.
I
RFID means radio frequency identification, which is a kind of smart gun that law enforcement would favor. They would not want a biometric because your fingers do get dirty. I just cut my thumb, so my smartphone thing doesn't work, but that's fine. I mean, my thumb will heal. But for a gun, you do need it to work immediately. So there are RFID, which someone will wear a ring or a watch, and the radio frequency transmits. When the wearer has that on, the gun will fire. Without that transmission device, the gun will not fire. So that's another kind of smart gun. And people have expressed willingness in national polls to buy smart guns. All that we're asking is that they allowed to be on the market alongside conventional guns. And I'm convinced that if smart guns were in households with children, for example, where you have people with mental health issues who might get depressed and try to commit suicide, 2/3 of all gun deaths are suicide, and certainly deterring the vast number of guns that are stolen, it would be a useless gun to a thief, a smart gun. So I believe the technology exists. We need to roll it out, starting with law enforcement. In Brooklyn, we're working on, through the Borough President's Office, a trial with NYPD to get them on board, and it will happen. It's the logical thing to do. If we can have smartphones, then for God's sake, we should have smart guns. Phones are not designed to kill, guns are, and you do not want guns ending up in the wrong hands killing children, which is what they're currently doing, or ending up in the hands of thieves and then killing our citizens, our fellow citizens. So I think it just makes sense. Smart guns are smart.
All right, Tom, this question's for you. Do you support micro-stamping on firing pins for purposes of aiding law enforcement in the investigation of gun-related crimes?
No. If it was a foolproof technology, maybe. This has been debated in New York State ad infinitum, or maybe I should say ad nauseum. Let me tell you about a firing pin on a gun. A micro-stamped firing pin has parts of the serial number of the gun etched onto the front of the firing pin so that when it hits the primer, it leaves those numbers on the gun, and it can be traced back to who's ever owned the gun. In theory, that sounds great, okay? However, the Suffolk County, New York Crime Bureau, Crime Lab, tested these out, and the head of the lab unequivocally stated that this technology does not work. Oh, by the way, there's only one person who's pushing this, and that's the inventor of it. No one else has said that it works. Now, how can this be bypassed? Well, I was doing an interview years ago when this first came up with a Albany, New York television network, and I had a firearm sitting on the table in front of me. And while they're talking and they're filming this, I take the gun apart. I pop out the firing pin that would be, and it wasn't micro-stamped, but it could have been, put it on the table, put another pin in, put the gun back together, and it took, about 3 minutes, okay? And the easier way to defeat it is the firing pin protrudes a little bit in the breech. Just go in there with a file and file it off. And the real easy way, And this was an anti-gun district attorney who told me this. He said, I would not prosecute anybody that came in with micro-stamped evidence. He said, because it would be too easy to go out to a firing range after hours when everybody's there, pick up a handful of shells that are left on the ground and scatter them around the crime scene. He said, there's just too many questions about this. And most of the police departments that I know about feel the same way. So, no, I do not support micro-stamping.
Okay. Leah, this question's for you. Colorado, Idaho, Kansas, Mississippi, Oregon, Texas, Utah, and Wisconsin all allow some students to carry concealed weapons on college campuses. Arkansas and Tennessee allow certain faculty members to carry weapons on campus. Do you believe those laws should be repealed?
Well, you know, I'm the mother of 2 kids. One's a sophomore in college, and my son graduated college. And I know one thing about kids and at that age. When they go to college, they're confronted with lots of things, hormones, drinking, stress, depression is one of the major illnesses treated on college campuses. And I can't think of anything more horrendous or horrific introducing into that mix firearms. And yet, that curiously is what the gun lobby now wishes to do, because they obviously clearly want to expand their market for guns. So campus carry laws, as they're known, are, I think, highly dangerous. College presidents and students and faculty and parents do not want them. That was the case at University of Texas, and yet Greg Abbott, the governor, and the Texas legislature rammed it through anyway. It puts a huge burden and poses a tremendous risk for those people who work at the schools and for the students as well. Insurance will skyrocket. Complying with this law is going to cost the University of Texas several $1 million, they're estimating. Also, I'd like just to say that the gun lobby pushes this campus carry as a safety measure, which I find completely perverse. That would protect women from sexual assault. Well, think about it. In theory, victims could use a gun to defend against a sexual predator, but the reality is actually much darker. The assailants would also be allowed to carry concealed weapons and force a young woman at gunpoint to have sex. So sexual violence on campus is often committed, as you know, by people who know each other, and is often linked to alcohol abuse, drinking, which is a very deadly scenario if you think about throwing a gun into a keg party. So allowing guns on campus is a very, very expensive gamble. University of Central Florida, it hasn't happened in Florida yet. They estimate that allowing more hidden loaded weapons in school would cost the school over $1 million. And the figure at University of Texas is $47 million to retrain staff and security and cover all their enhanced insurance premiums. So Ohio is now in the sights of the corporate gun lobby. They're trying to get the University of Ohio now to accept guns on campus, and the university president just came out today and said he can't think of a worse idea than that. So, I mean, I know parents that I've spoken to about this are horrified at the idea, and I actually think the U.S. News and World Report college ranking system should take into account whether campuses allow guns on campus, and that should be a big negative in the negative column if they do, because that's not going to enhance safety. It's going to certainly make people less safe.
King, this came in from somebody in the audience. It's about smart guns, and the question is, regular guns don't always work. They jam and have their own issues. How is that different from smart guns?
Who's that for me?
Yeah.
Oh. There's a lot less likelihood that would happen because you're not bringing an electronic component into it. I don't know if anybody out in the audience has any firearms, but firearms live in a world of oil. There's solvents that are used to clean them, and then they're oiled. Okay. penetrating oil does strange things to electronics, okay? Oil is the friend of standard guns. That's what keeps them clean, that's what keeps them lubricated, and that's what keeps them working. But if you throw electronics into it, you're talking about short circuits. You're talking about the contacts not being made. You're talking about a receiver being compromised by oil leaking in it. In the case of the RFID, so yeah, they do. Both of them malfunction. But if I had to use a firearm to protect my wife, my family, and my grandkids, I certainly wouldn't take the spark gun. I would take one of the good old-fashioned American-made firearms.
Okay, I'm gonna have one more question for each, then we'll have closing statements. Leah, you first. Do you support stand your ground laws?
I do not.
Or you tell the audience what they are and why you don't support them.
Absolutely, be happy to do that. Stand your ground laws are often called shoot first laws because it's kind of the same thing. It basically means you have no duty to retreat in the face of danger. And for centuries, our legal principles have been that when a person is confronted with a possible threat to their safety in a public place, the smart thing to do is to run, to retreat. Even George Washington retreated in the face of the British. That's how we won the Revolutionary War, because we were totally outgunned by the Redcoats. So Florida is one of the first states to pass the stand your ground law. It radically departs from this tradition of retreating in the face of danger before you have to absolutely use deadly force. So it basically provides a person who reasonably believes that deadly force is necessary to prevent imminent death or bodily harm, has no duty to retreat from a confrontation that occurs outside your home before you pull the trigger and kill somebody. So as a result of Florida's law, law enforcement agencies are prevented from arresting a person who used deadly force in self-defense unless the agency determines that probable cause exists, the force was unlawful. Problem is, you can't see what the situation was, what the altercation was. Think of the dark night that George Zimmerman shot Trayvon Martin, who was carrying a can of iced tea and some Skittles, no gun. And yet he shot him because he said he feared for his life. Who's to know? Whose word can you take for it? Trayvon Martin is dead. George Zimmerman was alive, and so all you had to go on was his word. A March 2012 statement from the Association of Prosecuting Attorneys said that shoot first laws give the killer immunity from prosecution. And this kind of blanket immunity is actually greater than the legal protections given to police officers who were involved in a shooting in the line of duty. So this kind of immunity, both civil and criminal, can sharply undermine the ability of law enforcement and prosecutors to protect the public, which is what they're charged to do, by prosecuting acts of gun violence. So it's interesting, the Tampa Bay Times did a study of Florida's Stand Your Ground law, and they found that the law had been invoked in at least 93 criminal cases involving 65 deaths, including neighbors arguing, bar brawls, road rage incidents, even a gang shootout, that just as easily might have ended with someone walking away unharmed. Instead, someone pulls out a gun because they think they can because of the law. In the majority of the cases, the person who plunged the knife or swung the bat or pulled the trigger didn't face a trial. In 50 of the cases, the person who used force was never charged with a crime. The investigation found that justifiable homicides reported to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement had increased threefold since the law went into effect. So they've also found that it's the Tampa Bay Times that has done this great research. The newspaper identified over 200 cases involving a fatality, 40 cases as a result of convictions, 73 deaths have been found to be justified. So stand your ground laws are a very bad idea. 26 states unfortunately have them. We don't have it at the federal level, but it's a license to kill, and I don't think it's a good idea.
Tom's last question's for you. We often hear from gun rights supporters that we don't need new laws, we need greater enforcement of those laws already on the books. Would you support an increase in the number of local and federal law enforcement agents if they were specifically tasked with greater enforcement of gun laws that are already on the books?
Absolutely. We do not want bad guys with guns on the street. And I'll give you, for instance, in 2009, and this came out of both the New York Times and the New York Post, there were 1,900 gun arrests in New York City. 1,900 for people who were in possession of illegal guns. 300 were prosecuted. Only 300. Now, I'm a law and order guy, okay? I believe that if you commit a crime, you should do the time. And we, as pro-gun advocates, believe that if you have a concealed gun, if you have a neighborhood gun, anybody know what a neighborhood gun is? Neighborhood gun is, there are gangs in all over, in all the cities of the country, and in Albany, who have guns hidden around the city in case the gang members need them. We have to take the gangs off the street. We have to take the illegal guns off the street. We have to, in fact, put these guys in jail. You know, recidivism, particularly in the narco-drug culture, is close to 100%. And these are the people that are committing the crimes. You know, a subject that nobody wants to talk about is the number of people that are killed while they're purchasing drugs or while they're dealing drugs. It's almost as bad as the epidemic, the opioid epidemic that's going throughout the country in New York State right now. So yes, put them in jail. Throw away the key as far as I'm concerned. If they are attempting to hurt somebody with an illegal gun, if they're that type of an animal, they belong in jail.
All right, that's it for questions on the closing statements. Yeah, you received the first question, so Tom, you will go first with a 2-minute closing statement.
I'm not an unreasonable man. I'm a husband, I have 2 kids. I have 4 grandchildren, 2 of whom are college age, that are your age, and 2 of whom are young children, 10 and 12. My 2 children grew up in my home with me being a gun owner without ever playing with a gun. They knew where they were able to shoot them, but they wouldn't go in and play with them. You know why? Because they knew there were consequences to their actions. That's what we don't provide today. There has to be consequences to every action. Now, I have a 10-year-old grandson, and I have a 12-year-old granddaughter. They both shoot on a regular basis. They have a single-shot .22 rifle. They both know how to operate it. They know how to keep it away. When I was in high school, I played football, basketball, and baseball. Okay, but there was a day that everybody, all of the after-school sports were called off, and that was the opening of hunting season. Okay, a pheasant hunting season in the Rochester area. That's where, in the school that I went to a suburban school called Fairport. And I would bring my shotgun to school with me, and it was stored in the principal's office. And after school, 5 or 6 of us would get down and get our firearms and go out, walk across the abandoned football field to the cornfields behind that. And one of the people walking with us was the principal of the high school. You know, no one was ever killed, no one was ever injured, and there was this unspoken word that you respected the people you were with, that you associated with. But most importantly, you respected human life. And that doesn't happen anymore. And I blame it on the fact that we're becoming a nanny state, and that the government and the state government is there and they're trying to protect you from your every need. And no one says, that's wrong, Johnny. They're saying, oh, Johnny, that's okay. We'll do something different next time. That's not good. There has to be a reaction for every action, and there has to be consequences when the rules are broken. Thank you.
Leah Barrett?
Yes, thank you. I too believe I'm a reasonable person. I'm a mother. I lost a brother to gun violence in 1997. My brother Greg was 40 years old, and he was shot dead at his business in Tulsa, Oklahoma during a robbery. The irony is he had a gun, but it didn't help him in that situation. Gun violence is clearly a crisis, a public health crisis in our nation. My daughter said to me when she was 10, she said, "Real Mom, if guns made you safer, America would be the safest country on the planet, but we're not." And, you know, out of the mouths of babes comes the truth. The fact that guns are the second leading cause of death for our youth in America. They're the leading cause of death for black youth. In 2014, gun deaths even surpassed motor vehicle deaths in 21 states and the District of Columbia. Every year it goes up. More states have higher gun deaths than motor vehicle deaths. And that says a lot given more people have cars than guns. You hear a lot about freedom and the Second Amendment from the so-called gun rights groups. By the way, I'm not anti-gun, I'm anti-gun violence. There's a big difference. But you hear very little from them about the devastation that gun violence inflicts on communities across our nation. It costs us $229 billion every single year. I care deeply about rights too, but you know, first and foremost, I care about my right and your right and the right of every American to not live in fear of being shot dead or grievously injured by a gun. Our Constitution states that every person is entitled to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But what we have seen with the unfettered access to guns, it means that 33,000 Americans on average every single year are deprived of their right to life. Now, I know that no right is absolute. I said that earlier. Free speech is curtailed, and the Second Amendment also is curtailed. And as I said, Justice Scalia agreed that it should be curtailed, and regulations are fully compatible with our Second Amendment rights. We know that gun laws work. States with strong gun laws, like New York, like Massachusetts, Connecticut, California, have lower gun death rates. The problem is we don't have strong gun laws at the federal level. There are just too many loopholes. Forgive the pun, but our federal laws are shot through with gaping loopholes. And as I said earlier, it's a silly argument to say that we shouldn't have any gun laws because criminals are not going to follow gun laws. But then in that case, why have any laws at all? It's not just a matter of crime and guns. 2/3 of our gun deaths are suicides, people putting a gun to their head and killing themselves. Would they find another means to do so? Maybe, but it's not going to be as lethal. When you use a gun, you succeed in killing yourself 90% of the time. When you use other means, the success rate is only 5%. Guns do the job very, very well. I also find it's not credible when people claim that gun laws are the first step towards gun confiscation. I mean, that's ludicrous. No one has ever talked about confiscating guns except for the corporate gun lobby. And they say it for a very clear reason, because fear sells guns and it fattens their company profits. I believe that no industry is more soaked in the blood of innocent Americans than that of the American gun industry. So, and they also say that mental health is a cause of gun violence. Well, even if the United States solved every single mental illness today and had a perfect mental health system, cured all these problems, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, depression, the overall problem of gun violence would still exist because mentally ill people just aren't that violent. People with mental illness committed fewer than 5% of U.S. gun killings between 2001 and 2010, according to the Centers for Disease Control. So it's past time to demolish the myth that owning a gun keeps you safer. A gun endangers the owner and his or her family far more than it protects them from an intruder. I don't want to live in a country where every person feels they need to be armed. This is not a war zone, at least not yet, and it's not what our founders meant when they wrote our Constitution. We really need leaders to stand up to the lies spewed by the corporate gun lobby and staunch the bleeding by treating our epidemic of gun violence with common sense regulations that are grounded in scientific research and public education. Just as this country reduced motor vehicle deaths by 90% since the 1960s, the same can and must be done with gun violence. Our lives and those of our children depend on it. Thank you very much.
That will conclude tonight's You Defend It debate. It's my hope that everyone watching the debate knows more about firearms issues than they did 90 minutes ago. We've heard from two people tonight who agree on very few issues but have a common passion for them. It is also my hope that the way the information was presented tonight will promote discussion between people who disagree on firearms issues. Thank you.